Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So today we are going to be drawing some more Honkai Star Rail fan art, and because I've drawn March 7th last time, I am going to be drawing our other fellow companion, which is Dan Heng. So Dan Heng is actually one of my favorite characters, just like visually and personality wise, but I feel like the drawing that I did for him today is kind of, I don't know, not exactly my favorite. There's something I don't like about it and something I like about it at the same time. And we'll get into that the more we get closer to the rendering portion. But for the sketching portion, I am once again starting off with my painting brush that I like to use, and I made the size of it kind of on the larger side so that we can kind of block in and get kind of a feel of what kind of pose and potentially a little bit of the composition or whatever elements that I want for the actual piece. So I like to work a little bit with these chunkier shapes just so we can plan out everything, and then after that I will lower the opacity and make a new layer, and we can actually start to sketch out the character, which is gonna be Dan Heng. So yeah, I've been really enjoying playing Star Rail recently, so it's kind of like I'm riding on the high still of really liking the game. So hopefully I'll be able to draw a few more characters. I think the next person that I'm gonna draw is probably Welt. I might draw Himeko after that. We'll see, because I'm trying to draw the people on the express first before we can move on. I do want to attempt to draw Jingyun eventually. Maybe one day, we'll see. But there's like a lot of pretty and handsome characters in this game, so I definitely want to draw a whole bunch of them. But with that being said, there's still a lot of Genshin characters I would like to draw as well, and a bunch of other things that I'm into, such as like VTubers, so I would like to continue to draw them. So apologies if the next few videos for, I don't know, a few weeks will probably be more or less draw with me's, and I'm just gonna be trying my best to record the process for you guys so you guys can see the illustrations. Kind of just like, not like step by step, but like more or less seeing the process, at least like little snippets of it, every time I do end up doing some kind of drawing for them. So kind of like small update in terms of my sketchbook. So I'm trying to think of exactly when this video is gonna come out. I think by the time this video comes out, I'm already gonna be starting my new sketchbook right away, pretty much. And all I can say is that I've been really enjoying drawing in my sketchbook once again. I think it's because I get to draw a little bit more with pencil and I feel a little bit more free, I guess, because less pressure. And I've been kind of drawing, or at least like dabbling into drawing Genshin characters again, Honkai characters, and what I mean by Honkai, I mostly mean Star Rail. I haven't really looked into too much of Honkai Impact 3rd, so most likely it's just gonna be Genshin and then Honkai, Star Rail, and then VTuber stuff, and obviously OC stuff, probably. And then the other thing I wanted to kind of get back into the swing of things is that I mentioned in that sketchbook tour that I did last week that I wanted to do a zine for flowers. Now it's been put on the back burner once again, just because this month's kind of a weird month for me, and same with the end of April, but hopefully I'll get back onto that before I guess like I abandon the project, because I don't really want to, and I do want to make like a bunch of illustrations for it. So if I can do that, I will try my best to work on that when I can. So for the sketch, I do have Dan Heng kind of like at this angle where you're kind of looking a little bit downwards at him, so you can see kind of like his shoulder and his back a little bit, and his neck's kind of like not super noticeable. It's like because of the head being in front of where the neck is. But because of this posing, I decided to also keep, I don't know, I kind of wanted both hands to be in the composition. So I have one hand holding the maple leaf-ish kind of plant, and then the other one, I wanted his head to be kind of resting on it. And I had a bit of a problem doing this, and part of it's because I don't know what's with my drawing mood lately, but I've been struggling drawing that pose. But also Dan Heng's kind of armor or accessories around his hand is a little bit weird. So he does have what feels like kind of fingerless gloves in a sense, or like it goes almost up till your first joint, like where you're yeah, I guess like the first joint of your fingers. But he also has like this piece that kind of covers his entire top part of his hand, but it's connected with I guess it's like a little strap underneath for each finger. So I feel like I was getting too confused with how to place it so that both of them can fit snug onto his hand and his fingers. So I feel like I drew the hand very weird, and I don't think I end up really correcting it, which is kind of contributes to the fact that why I don't like this piece too much. The other hand also, which is holding the leaf, I was referencing my own hand, so I feel like it looks a little bit chunkier compared to probably what Dan Heng probably would have. So apologies about that. And I also did the sketch on a separate layer, like the leaf, so that I could kind of like arrange it a little bit prior to merging it, because I accidentally didn't realize that if I place the leaf in this way, it kind of covers up his neat looking earring that's on the one side, because he does have earrings on both sides, or at least I'm assuming they're earrings. And I do like the shape of it. It's very, I feel like, not conventional to a lot of like earring shapes, so I wanted to keep it intact, but because of the placement of the leaf, it became not possible. Okay, so a bit of change of pace. After I finished the sketch, I went ahead and did the background like I usually do, so we can kind of get the color temperature and the lighting situation already before I start to color in the figure. And I really wanted to go with the kind of like teal turquoise-ish color scheme, and then go with the stark kind of orangey, punchier red colors for the leaves, because I really like the color combination of red and kind of like teal or turquoise. I think it just looks really pretty. And the reason why I'm speeding this up is actually because I am going to be scrapping this background, but I wanted to include it in because you guys will see it in the time lapse regardless. So I thought it would be easier for me to just show that even though I was trying my best to make this work out, I end up changing it. At some point, I kind of wish I kept it just because I feel like this had a stronger color palette than my second attempt. But for now, we're gonna leave this, and then we're gonna color Dan Heng a little bit, and then later on I will do another session where I will change the background once again. So when coloring in the figure, regardless of who it is, I do like to make sure that I have some kind of colored background or whatever I want to have for the scene. So it's better for me to kind of understand the color temperature and the lighting situation if I don't want to really fuss too much with adding like filters or adding like multiply layers, overlay layers, and like addition layers to get the lighting correct. If I can, I like to try my best to make sure the character looks like they're in their environment prior to doing those extra blend modes on top, just because it's good for learning, but also just like makes it a little bit easier for me to kind of distribute the colors the way I want them to. Because when I do like the general coloring for the figure, sometimes I like to incorporate some of the other colors into the character. So let's say for Dan Heng, I could use some of the teal into his hair or into his skin for shadows, and then it won't look too off because it's also present in the rest of the picture or the illustration. And just like right here, I took some of that teal color and then lightly placed it on top of the skin, and then with that color I would pick up a new color that's kind of like the mix between those two, and I kind of got this grayish color that's a little bit more on the cooler side, and I like to use it in conjunction with the kind of a warmer shadow and a purple color so that we could add a little bit more depth and coolness to his overall skin tone, where the shadow basically is placed on his face. I think it just matches a little bit better if I'm able to incorporate some of the background color into the actual figure's colors. So for Dan Heng's eye color, I couldn't tell if there was like a hint of yellow somewhere on the bottom portion of his eyes. So for now, I kind of left it in. I'm gonna make it a lot more subtle when we start to render it, but his eyes are pretty much more or less either kind of like a turquoise-ish gray. It's kind of muted in a sense, but I think I kind of pushed the turquoise color a little bit further just because it matches with the background a little bit better. And then for Dan Heng's hair, once we get to that portion, I am going to be kind of switching between a super bright iPad screen to a super dark one, because black doesn't show up very well on my iPad because of the contrast. So sometimes it looks like I'm coloring into like a black void, even though I'm like changing the hue and I'm adding a little bit of shadows here and there. It's just very hard for my camera to pick up, which is unfortunate. So probably also during the rendering phase, I won't show too much of the actual hair being colored other than on the side that is actually getting hit by the light, because it's the most visible, I guess. It doesn't make sense for me to show this portion like on the left side of his head because it just becomes like a dark mess basically. So I did brighten up my whole iPad screen so you guys could see, but you can see now everything else is blown out, but the hair you can see perfectly. So I'm basically just gonna revert that back to what it was originally, and the hair will just be hard to see until probably the time lapse at the very end, where you can see the colors a little bit more accurately compared to how my webcam is picking them up. So Dan Heng does have dark hair, and like for majority of the characters that I draw, especially that have kind of like their bangs or their fringe coming into their face, I like to add a little bit of their skin tone into the hair. This works a lot better if the hair is a little bit darker than the skin tone in any kind of way, just because it makes everything around it a little bit softer if I add the skin tone color. So I like to do that, and then once we get to coloring in the actual sketches color, I'll make it a little bit softer again before we actually start to render. So for some of the white areas for Dan Heng's outfit, I did use like colors from his skin tone to do some of the shading, and then I pulled some of that turquoise color for shading as well, so we can kind of have a mixture of both the warm colors and the cool colors together. But then I think at this point is probably when I was realizing I didn't really like how I was already coloring Dan Heng, and it might have been just the face portion. I don't know. Maybe this lighting just didn't fit for what exactly I had envisioned for it, so maybe in the future I might redo the Dan Heng piece. And if you were here for, I think, last week's live stream session, which I streamed on YouTube, which I won't do very often, I said that I also might want to redo the drawing that I did of March 7th, so I might redo that one as well. And I don't know, I think it's just like personal preference. At the time, I think I liked it, but like now that I'm re-looking at it, I don't really enjoy that piece too much. Yeah, but here's kind of like where I was messing around with the different colors for the shading of the white. So I kind of have a gray color going on here, and then some areas I have that warmth from the skin, and then some other areas I have that kind of greenish, bluish color coming from his other accents. And I think it just works a little bit better, especially because white sometimes can feel a little bit dull, but white obviously has a lot of like capabilities of having other colors reflect off of it, so I feel like it's easily influenced by other colors surrounding it, so I like to try my best to incorporate other colors. Okay, so we're in the second time-lapse portion, and I'm going to try a different background kind of color scheme, or at least a different approach, because I think I wanted a bit of a stronger sense of lighting coming from one side, but I also didn't really like how I did the leaves and stuff, so hopefully this one works out a little bit okay. I feel like the other one color wise, like color palette wise, was a little bit stronger. This one was lacking a little bit of that, so yeah, I even tried to use the original leaves that I had drawn out to see if it would fit, but I didn't really like it, so we're gonna redo it, and I'm gonna have these directly in the foreground instead of putting this in the background. So while I'm going to be basically rendering Dan Heng, I'm going to hide this layer so you probably won't see it for a bit, and then I'll replace it back in at the very end. So for the kind of like maple leaf type shapes, I actually went in with the selection tool so we can get some nice sharp edges, and it's easy for me to just quickly fill in shapes to make the kind of look like more of like cluster of leaves instead. And I just found it a lot easier to do it this way rather than me manually drawing each individual shape and filling it in. So yeah, I feel like this color palette's a little bit more dull compared to the one I had originally, which is kind of, like I said, a little bit unfortunate, because I would have preferred for me to have that brighter, poppier color. But I think in the future, if I draw Dan Heng again, I will reattempt a different vision I had for this particular drawing. I also preemptively drew the other maple leaf or maple leaves that I have in the foreground that I will have kind of swishing across, and I'm going to reposition them a little bit later because I feel like they're covering Dan Heng a little bit too much. So yeah, I have that all set up. I'm going to add a few like color adjustments before we move on, and a little bit of lighting, and then after I hide them all, we can move on to the rest of Dan Heng. So pretty much at this point, I already merged my sketch with the colors for Dan Heng. I don't remember if I showed me actually adjusting the colors of the sketch so it matches a bit softer, but because it's already merged, I went ahead and also added an addition layer or an add layer, which is the blend mode that I like to use to add any kind of like stronger lighting, any rim lighting or anything like that. So I'm adding a little bit of rim lighting and a little bit of a softer light on top of where his hair is, and a bit of his body, and a little bit of the little leaf. So pretty much wherever the light will hit Dan Heng from the kind of upper right hand side onto him is kind of where I have it. And then I believe I also will add a multiply layer so that we can also kind of further push some of the shadows down, because if we have a stronger lighting, it also means that we will have stronger shadows. So I wanted to make sure that becomes apparent. And then I didn't really show it, but at that point I did merge my layers downwards so that things kind of are merged all into one layer, so it'll be easier for me to render and paint everything. So that is what step we are on currently. And like I said, I wanted to add a little bit of that yellow into his eyes, and pretty much during this step is basically where I'm just cleaning up everything, making sure things look sharp, and adjusting anything that needs to be adjusted before we can actually finish the piece. So usually when I start the kind of rendering process or cleaning up phase, I like to start usually around the face area, because that's usually my favorite place to actually start, just because I like drawing the face. So that'll pretty much include the eyes, the mouth and the nose, a lot of the surrounding hair around his face. And I went ahead also to eliminate any of those kind of like stragglers of lines around Dan Heng before tackling everything else. But like I said, I won't be showing too much of me rendering the hair on the left side, just because it is going to be hard to see, and that is going to be the same for the rest of his body too. So a lot of the stuff on the left side is going to be hard for me to show on camera. So hopefully I had enough footage for me to show you guys just rendering in general of mostly the right side and anywhere that has a little bit more light. And you can see kind of like his earrings kind of poking out from behind the leaf. Now, I think I'll remedy it at the end, but I think I should have put maybe his arm with the leaf and the hand on a separate layer, because I actually wanted this to be kind of more forward compared to the rest of the Dan Heng, just because the way how I have it positioned, it's not like directly next to his face or on his face, it's kind of like in front of him. So I hope it will read like that. I think in the end I'll be able to make it read a little bit better just because of selective blurring of things. So yeah, just I guess more stuff for me to keep in the back of my brain when I'm planning out future pieces. I think when I was doing a live stream last week, a person asked whether or not when I start to kind of like get into the sketching phase for a illustration or anything like that, do I plan everything in advance and have like a pose in mind and I follow it through and through, or do I kind of go with the flow? And for the most part, I kind of do a little bit of both. So usually I have a general idea of how I want to draw, like let's say Dan Heng or like any character. So like usually I'll think about the aesthetic, potential color palettes, background elements, anything like that. But usually when I actually get into drawing like the pose, or we start to flesh out the character a lot more, sometimes I will stray away from the initial plan and do something that I think will fit a little bit better, hopefully will be better than my initial planning. So yeah, I don't plan everything to a T. I feel like because digital has the flexibility to change things a little bit easier, like you can move things, you can readjust, you can resize things just super easily by selecting things on your canvas, or if you need to change colors and all that jazz. But traditionally, it's better to usually plan things a little bit more meticulously, depending on your process, I guess. because sometimes I plan out the sketch but I don't plan out the colors, and then that leads to a different problem. But then sometimes I follow something so faithfully that I get very sick of it at the very end, or I wish I did kind of more of like experimentation a little bit here and there. So yeah, I think it's mostly up to preference though, or I guess more so like maybe it comes down to your personality too. I do like having structure, which is kind of why I tend to follow the same steps over and over again when I'm working on a piece, and sometimes maybe the steps seem a little bit repetitive, but for the most part I don't want to be too restricted to whatever I initially had planned. And I also mentioned in that live stream too, is that when I plan out pieces, even for like digital drawings and illustrations, I like to thumbnail and everything traditionally. I find it a little bit more freeing and a little bit easier for me to be loose and not have too much I guess like the ability to keep adding things too often, because digital, I don't know, for me digital has so much to offer and so much things you can keep adding or changing so easily that I feel like sometimes I might get too like hung up on a certain thumbnail rather than letting myself kind of explore ideas a lot quicker via pencil, because usually when I have a thumbnail I don't really erase too much. I just, if I like it, I'll just replicate it and try to add like new things, or I try to adjust it a little bit. But for the most part, I think it's just easier for me to move on if it's traditional, because I can't delete it in a single touch kind of idea. But for the rest of Dan Heng, I think for the most part, I feel like the footage was a little bit more choppier than usual, just because I was trying to keep it to a bit of a shorter time than I usually do. Usually I try to hit the 30-minute mark just because I like to give maybe 10 minutes for sketching, 10 minutes for the coloring, and then 10 minutes for the finishing up and the rendering process. But for this one, because I cut out a lot of the, I guess like me finagling with the hair and then the left side of Dan Heng in general, there's a lot of things I could cut out just because it was not easily visible for you guys. I did leave in some of the clips where I changed the exposure to be super high so that you could see his hair, but everything else was like super blown out. Okay, so let's talk about the last portion of the drawing. So after I finished rendering Dan Heng to kind of like what I would consider finished, I'm going ahead and kind of like resorting my layers so that I can merge them with the background. So I basically, all I want is the background, Dan Heng, and the foreground elements to be separate, but I don't see it necessary for me to have all the background elements to be separate because they're all behind Dan Heng. So it's just easier for me to merge them all. And then after that, I put Dan Heng and the background together into one group or folder. I duplicate the folder and then I flatten the new one so that I can Gaussian blur it all together, so it's much easier for me to do this. And then it's easier for me to also just erase what I want to be in focus, which tends to be everything except for the hand with the leaf, which I kind of want it to remain a little bit more out of focus, a little bit fuzzier, because like I said, I wanted it to be a little bit in front of him, which is also why his hand reads a little bit larger than how I would draw it if it was actually right next to his face. So I think that's pretty much it. I don't remember if I do any color adjustments or if I forget to. I think for the rest of it, it's just me fiddling with the foreground elements. So I moved some of the leaves out of the way too, so it didn't cover up too much of Dan Heng. But I think that's pretty much it for the entire process of him. So I'm going to be showing you guys kind of the time lapse and kind of how it shifted a little bit. I feel like the viewpoint, not the viewpoint, his body shifted a little bit different. It became more of like, I don't know, less foreshortened from up above. So it changed a little bit, and you can see the kind of the difference between this background and the other background. This background appears a little bit more cool toned, a little bit less punchy, a little bit more muted, and I do like it because it feels a little bit more lighter and airy, but I feel like I might have liked the punchier colors better. But hopefully you guys liked today's drawing session of Dan Heng, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye!